Welcome back, everybody, to this new episode of Hamilton Icons. Today, I'm joined by Lina Ho, who is an occupational therapist, and we're going to talk about some really exciting stuff. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
This is our second foray into media now.
Yeah,
We had you on Cable 14, which
yeah.
went really, really well. And that was actually a lot of really good information. So I'm glad that now we have this platform that we can cover a little bit more
In detail.
in
Yeah.
detail, right? Because I feel like you also had a lot more that you want to talk about too,
Yeah.
that you were able
Sure.
to cover. You got a lecture? I like it. All right. Well, we got time for a lecture. So do you want to start by just telling us a little bit about how you got into this field?
Yeah. So, my parents were they're immigrants and they do a lot of factory jobs and they got injured a lot. So it inspired me to find a career that would um help them rehabilitate, but also to adapt. So like if they develop an injury, how do they compensate for it as they recover? Initially, I wanted to be a physiotherapist, but then a classmate of mine uh, talked about the career as an OT, where we could do rehab, but we could also do other things like cognitive assessments and home adaptations and equipment, and I found that a lot more fascinating. So that's how I got into the career. And I love it. It's very fulfilling. I wake up every day excited to start the day, and then I come home feeling like I have accomplished something.
Now, that's really good to be able to have that feeling, especially with your job, because so many people feel like they go to work and it's just this monotony of not enjoying it or they have to do it. But coming home fulfilled is such a huge
Yeah.
aspect of work.
There's a lot of
Right.
problem solving. So that's what makes it interesting. Everybody's different, environment's different, preferences are different. So you might have two people with the same diagnosis, but they'll present differently and they'll behave differently. So you might recommend one thing for this person, but based on their environment, their social backgrounds and stuff like that, it might not work for them. So
hmm
you constantly have to assess the person as they are,
hmm
as an individual.
So when you're dealing more with the occupational side of it, are you dealing more with seniors? Is it sort of a spread of age groups that you're dealing with, or what do you find is the main focus?
So I've had some pediatrics, a lot of adults, but mostly my specialty is in geriatrics. I find that very fascinating.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Why do you find that fascinating?
Um, it's just because like you see how like with an adult, they could be more able-bodied, and then they can recover from some of the injuries that they sustained, or they can they just have a little bit more how do I say it? They have a little bit more resilience, but as you get older, it's harder to recover from something. Like if a patient of mine has fallen, there's if you're in your 50s, you might recover a lot quicker and sooner, or you're more likely to recover. But someone who's in their 80s and 90s, it's just a lot harder. So trying to problem solve and figure out how to help them recover from it, how to cope with their conditions, it's more challenging, and that's what I like. I like the challenge.
Yeah, and I guess that's what gives you that fulfillment, right? Is overcoming the challenges, and
Yeah.
even though you're dealing with, mostly seniors, I imagine, like you said, each case is different. So even though you might run into the same issue with somebody, then there might be different scenarios that you have to work around for them, right?
Very much so, yeah, yeah. I had a patient of mine, he was in his 80s, and, he shattered his pelvic bone, and, but he was an avid cyclist, recovered within a month. Back
Wow.
to walking, no problem. But then I've had patients who were also around the same age, had a fall, broke a hip, never recovered.
Mhm.
But those were the people who were, they were typically patients who were sedentary, who didn't work out, who wasn't active. So some of those people don't recover at all.
Yeah, that's always even one of my personal things that I always think of is what I'm doing today is for my future self because I think we have more access now our day like to what how to take care of yourself to make sure that you age a lot better. Whereas
Yes.
information like that probably wasn't as readily as available for that generation like it is to
Yeah.
ours. Like if you get something in your algorithm now about it on Instagram, you
Yeah.
can go down that rabbit hole and you can be like, not I'm not gonna say an expert, but you learn a lot about it, right? Whereas people they weren't exposed to that, right?
No. Yeah,
All they
true.
had was a newspaper, but they weren't getting informational stuff on how to actually take care of themselves
Right. That
to age appropriately, right? Or
and then
better.
by the time they're at that age where they needed more of that, where they should have worked out, but then now they're aging and they're struggling with recovering. It's sometime like, I can't say it's too late, but at that point, mentally, they find it a lot harder to start that process. But it's even like people our age too. I so growing up, I was chubby and I got made fun of for it. But um I cope with that by working out. And I've been working out ever since I was in grade 9. And because I started early, I still work out even now and I'm 38. um, but trying to start that, like, a few friends of mine, starting that now and be consistent with it every single day is a lot harder because you don't have that mindset,
Mhm.
right? It's so much harder to change that. It doesn't click overnight. It takes so much work. And then I find that people who work out earlier, their ability to tolerate pain is a lot better, and to push through the struggles is better if you started earlier and you've been working on it longer. But that's not to say that you can't start like
Mhm.
now. Like even patients who are in their 80s, like I will still push them to be active, to walk. And I see a change in them, even if it's just like walking like 100 meters, 50 meters, just them getting up and walking, you could see how much it changes them mentally and physically.
Yeah, just the movement, right?
Mhm.
And I know that's, even something I used to be pretty sedimentary, right? Like sedimentary? Yeah.
Hereditary.
Sedentary, sorry.
It's like,
And, thank you. And, it took me a while to get in the habit. Now I'm at the gym every morning. Well, 5 days a week, 5:45 in the morning, right? Because I
wow.
go to F45, so it's a scheduled class time, so it kinda gave me that forced commitment. Um, but you're right, it took a long journey to get there, but eventually I did, and it was just by starting small. Like, I used to just go for a walk or I would run, and then eventually I started getting a little more into it,
Yeah.
and then it builds. And you having that already in you is great. Like, that's why you're more athletic than, your husband right now. If he's watching this, he knows. I mentioned it to him last week. I'm like, Lena was saying that, and he loved it. He's like, "Yep, she definitely is." She de Apparently, you can throw a football a lot better than he can, and
Twice the
he's
distance.
twice the distance, and he's not embarrassed. He loves it. He's like, "Yeah, I love it. I love that she can bomb it. Like, that's great."
Yeah. I try to present myself looking very girly,
Yeah.
and it just surprises people because it's like, it's not what you would expect, right?
Yeah.
Um, but when it comes to working out, like, last was it this summer or last summer, me and my husband went biking with some friends, and he's not a biker, and I used to bike, like, I would bike from Hamilton to Toronto, and it was nothing, like, I
Wow.
never felt sore. It was like I was just cruising with my friend, and, so then, 2 of our friends asked us to join them on a bike ride, and it was a 25K bike ride. I'm like, "Well, this is nothing." Like, normally, I'll do, like, 30 to 60 kilometers, no problem, before I had a child, and it felt like nothing, but Stu was dying.
Oh, I bet he was. He doesn't look like he does a lot of cardio. No offense, dude. That's not
But he played basketball, so it wasn't like a
Does a
like
lot. Yeah.
yeah, he picked it up quick.
Yeah.
It just takes me a lot longer, and it's because I had to spend more years working towards it, whereas he started even younger than I did.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And it makes a difference as you age too. Like I look at my mom, I'm not gonna say her age, but she's older. She plays pickleball 7 days a week. She's
Oh my
addicted
gosh,
to
wow.
pickleball.
Amazing.
But she's actually in the last 2 years gone through the process with a personal trainer. She's worked out since as long as I can remember. And she, for her age, is in phenomenal shape,
Right?
like, just she has definition, she's very fit,
Yeah.
right? And you notice the difference, and she tells me, when she goes to play with, certain seniors, if they take a fall at pickleball, it's a big deal, right? Where she's taken a couple tumbles, but she's able to get up
Yep.
and she might be sore for a day, but she's ultimately fine, right? And you just see, like, I see that from a personal example of somebody who's always taking care of themselves and how they age differently than other women that I see
Whatever.
her age, right?
Yeah, yeah, and you know what? Speaking of falls, so when you weight lift, right, you're building bone density. You're building you're maintaining the muscle fibers because as you age, I couldn't remember. There was a gentleman that does he does a podcast. It's called Institute of Human Anatomy, and he was talking about how like when you hit your 30s, you start to lose I think 3% of your muscle mass or your bone mass. I can't remember, and then as you hit your 50s, you lose 10% of it. So it's a rapid decline, but because your mom has worked on it for so long, so there's different types of muscles. You got the slow twitch muscle, you got the fast twitch muscles. And a lot of the times people fall is because they've lost their fast twitch muscles. The ones where you like kind of like correct yourself. It's like fast twitch. Like you have to it's that powerful contraction, and so because your mom has worked out for so long that she's probably maintained a lot of her fast twitch muscle fibers. So she might fall but not crack anything because her bone density is not brittle. Like
Mhm,
she's maintained some of that. But at the same time, she's less likely to fall because she's got the fast twitch muscles can keep her from that can allow her to react and correct herself before completely falling.
mhm,
And even at the same time, when she does fall, it minimizes it too because she knows how to react without falling heavily to the ground. It's a little bit less it dampens it a little bit.
mhm,
So it's very important for her to keep up with that, and I want people to start thinking about exercising because it's a preventative thing, not for aesthetic purposes either. And I feel like a lot of people have a hard time getting to an exercise regimen because the first thing people focus on and think about is, weight loss. And we deal with that every single day. And the problem with that is when your focus is losing weight, it because it takes so long to get there that when you don't get it immediately right away, you get discouraged. So a lot of times when I talk to my patients, when I talk to friends, when I'm talking about like exercising, think about short-term goals, things that are just so much more achievable. So like, instead of thinking about how many pounds you want to lose, think about how many minutes you're going to spend on a certain exercise. So like for example, running on treadmill, focus on, okay, let's start off with 5 minutes and then next week, let's do 7 minutes and then make it achievable. But then when you start to achieve those small incremental short-term goals, it just makes it more it helps to keep you motivated so that you can keep at it, and then before long, before you know it, you lose all the weight that you wanted to lose,
mhm.
but you didn't have to stress about it.
That's like a concept in, one of my favorite books, Atomic Habits.
Yeah.
It's that's one of the main concepts is just
Yeah.
doing it, even if it's for 5 minutes, just do it, but get in the habit of going to the gym and do it. You just start 5 minutes, and then you'll find yourself slowly as you continue to do it, you'll start to increase just naturally
Exactly.
the time, right? And then you start to stack habits.
Yep.
So
Yep.
that's definitely a really popular concept, and so yeah, go ahead.
We learned that in OT school. So they teach us about grading the task. So basically, when like for example, if if it's someone who has an impairment, so let's say you like my knee surgery, like my knee, so I graded the activities. So getting up was very hard for me, right? So you would grade the task. So I would make my bed higher, so it was that much easier to stand up because I'm halfway up, uh, halfway standing already. And then as I get better and stronger, then I lower the bed a little bit, and it makes it hard. So it incrementally gets harder and harder. But I'm making it such a way where I'm achieving the goal slowly, but I'm grading the task so it becomes incrementally more difficult, more challenging for me. So that's the same thing as exercise. Is like grading the task. Start off with small easily achievable goals and then get a little bit progressively harder and harder
Mhm.
so that you maintain your motivation.
Yeah, and it's, applicable in so many areas of life, even outside of just exercise, just a lot of things that you wanna try to build a habit around, right,
Yeah.
to keep it going. So, you also deal with a lot of people in houses too, right? Like, when it comes to outfitting houses. I know we're going through a time right now, I'm seeing it at least in real estate, where people that they're looking to downsize, but they might have a two-story home. But the problem is a lot of these places, like bungalows, are actually going at a premium right now, so they're kinda stuck in their two-story home.
Yeah.
So what are some of the things that you think people should look for if, say, that they think this is gonna be a home they're gonna retire in? Like, what are some things people should look for when they're looking to buy a home,
Yeah.
when they're not quite at that stage that
Yeah.
they need main floor living or they need accessibility?
Yeah. So if yes, bungalows are obviously the best ones to get. Um and I can't even say like apartments or condos. They're great. Condos are great because they're made now so that the space is a lot bigger. But like if you're moving into an older apartment, the bathroom spaces tend to be extremely small. And it makes it hard, especially if you're especially for patients who need or individuals who need walkers. It's harder to get around, to turn and operate. Um, so when if there are people looking to buy houses, and I guess the only type of houses that are available are 2 stories, things to look out for that are important is, um, the garage access, because people can think when you buy a house, "Oh, you could put a ramp in the front, if anything," right? If it's like, how many steps? You wanna think about how many steps, do you require to get into the house? So, that's one of the things. If there's too many steps, then it's gonna be very difficult for you to get in. The second thing to look at is, okay, let's say, uh, the garage entrance, it's they're usually only a few steps, and it's much easier to build a ramp inside the garage because then you're sheltered from the inclement weather. You don't have to maintain, uh, you don't have to worry about shoveling the snow off the ramps because they can become icy and slippery. Sometimes, when it's raining, people tend to rush because they want to get out of the rain, but then everything becomes more slippery. So if you're looking for a house, you want to look for the garage entrance and make sure that the garage entrance has enough. It isn't narrow to get there either, so that there's not so that the turning radius is big enough to accommodate a walker or a wheelchair or someone pushing you in one. So that's one thing I would look for. Alternative entrances too. Sometimes you can't put a ramp in the front house. Sometimes you can do it in the side entrance, right? Um, Other things too, I would suggest is making sure that there's a bathroom on the main floor
Like
because
a full washroom or just a two-piece?
a
Like,
full.
full?
Yeah. The reason why I say that is because uh my patients sometimes end up in like they live in a two-story home. But because they can't make it all the way up the stairs for reasons like they can't put a stair lift in because they might not be able to afford it, or the structure of the house doesn't permit one. It's rare, but sometimes it doesn't permit it. But patients will end up living on the main floor because that's where the kitchen is, that's where the front entrance is if they have to go to appointments, right? Even for like fire safety or just kind of for safety reasons, you want to be able to get out of the house if anything were to happen. So it's always important to have a bathroom on the main floor. A full bathroom would be ideal, but obviously most houses don't, and they have powder rooms, so it's just a toilet and a sink. And that's fine because people can sponge bathe, but as long as there's a bathroom
Mhm.
on the main floor, it's very important to have that.
Mhm. Even to consider maybe looking at bathrooms that could have space to eventually add a shower or
Yeah.
I was actually in a house recently, now that you're talking about it, it just clicked into my head that I was in a house recently that they converted the dining room into a bedroom,
Yeah.
and they actually had laundry on that main floor, and they took the laundry machines out, and they put one of those walk-in bathtubs, like the bathtubs that are high,
Yeah, I know the
that the
ones.
door opens and you can walk in and close it.
Yeah.
They put one of those in, so they had the powder room, and then they just had what used to be the laundry room, they just basically put that bathtub in. But yeah, you're right, because you don't think of it that often. I guess you really do go to the main floor living when you're unable to do the stairs, or if your
Yeah.
house doesn't permit it, right?
Yeah.
I know we touch about some of the stair lifts on cable 14, but I know we can talk about it again here.
Yeah.
What should people consider when they're looking at that option? Like, are they expensive? Are they cheap? Are they bulky? Are they small?
They're thankfully, the designs have improved, and they can be very sleek, very narrow, that you could flip the seat up, and then it gives you enough space for other people to walk up, the ones that don't need it. But, they're not expensive if you have a straight stair. So, straight stairs, it can cost around 3,500. But if you've got a turning staircase or a spiral staircase, they have to be custom,
Mm.
especially if you want a continuous loop. They can cost upwards of 10 to 15,000.
Wow.
Yeah.
So maybe somebody looking then should consider getting a
Spiral
straight
yeah.
staircase. Yeah.
Spiral staircases are terrible because in the middle, they tend to be a little bit more narrow, but sometimes the staircases can be really big to keep the steps a little bit more consistent in terms of, like, the depth of the stairs. But because of that, sometimes they don't have railings on both sides, and the stairs are wide, so you have to think about that too. So, yeah, I would recommend a house with a turning staircase or a spiral staircase. I've had patients where they put stair lifts, 1 stair lift, and the second stair lift because it was cheaper, but then they'd have to walk from the 1 stair lift to the next, and sometimes they just get to the point where they can't make that walk to the
Mhm.
next one, and then it's like they
What do you
wasted all
do?
that money. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So, yeah, so that's something to consider, but, like, again, you could always situate yourself on the main floor if you have that bathroom. But even if, you let's say you can't afford to move from your house and you live in a two-story and there is no powder room, there's equipment that you could put in place. It's not ideal, it's not the best solution, but it's a solution. So you could get a commode that you could have on the main floor. So that's a portable toilet. And then you can use a kitchen sink.
Mhm.
Yeah. So that's one way to get around it.
Just as an option, right?
Yeah, but then you have to empty it.
Yeah.
Oh, it's the end of the day.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
That wouldn't be too exciting.
No.
But I mean, if you're stuck with it, you're stuck with it, right? I mean, at that case, then I think you're probably in a different situation. Maybe you really need to think about moving, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, what else?
So
I know you had an outline coming into today,
I
some stuff
know.
you wanted to talk about.
Yeah, yeah. So unfortunately, the older houses, the doorways are made a lot more narrow. Um, really, really, really old houses, the doorways are so narrow that they don't fit a lot of wheelchairs.
How wide does it need to be?
Um, well, it depends on the person's width, right? So on average, people are between 18 inches wide by 20 inches. And so their doorways, minimum, you probably need like 31 inches wide. But then it also depends, are you hand propelling too? So if you're hand propelling, you'll need hand rims on the wheelchair. So comfortably to maneuver through a doorway, you're probably looking at 32, 33. Yeah.
Okay.
So doorways being one, turning radius. So like the bathroom and the bedrooms are the important ones. So you want to make sure that like the hallways are wide enough because if the hallways are narrow and if the bedroom is at the back and or at a corner, then you can't turn into the bedroom. It makes it harder to turn into. Same with the bathrooms. And then things to look forward to is the carpeting. If you use a walker or a wheelchair and the house has carpeting everywhere, it makes it harder to propel because of the friction. The wheels don't go on the carpet as well, especially like the high plush ones.
Mhm.
Yeah, those are a lot harder to operate on. I've had patients who had hospital beds on the main floor and it was carpeting, but they were wheelchair bound, so they needed to use it's a machine called an electric floor lift. So it's like a crane and it lifts the patients up in the air and then you move the machine and then you direct it so that it's above the wheelchair and then you lower them. But the problem with that is the wheels are about like maybe 3, 4 inches big. And trying to maneuver a heavy machine like that over carpet is very difficult because it sinks into the carpet.
Mm.
So
Yeah, I guess.
hardwood is the best way.
Yeah, I could see that. I guess really anything, even vinyl or laminate, maybe might
Yeah,
be it too, right? Just anything
true.
not carpet, right? You wouldn't even think of stuff like that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. I'm trying to think of other things too. Yeah, and bathrooms. Like you want to make sure that the space in your bathroom is big enough. Not just to fit a wheelchair in, but you got to remember that the space between the bathtub and the toilet needs to be big enough so that you could fit someone who a caregiver as well. Because most of the time, as my patient age, they need help with showers. They need help with getting into the tub. And some bathrooms can be so small that it's hard to fit two people and a wheelchair inside.
Hey, everybody, thank you for watching along so far. Truly appreciated it. And I just want to take this opportunity to remind you that it is the job of a real estate agent to correctly market and maximize the exposure of your home. And there is nobody out there that casts a wider net than I do. I'm Justin Little with Remax Escarpment, and I'm a local real estate agent here in Hamilton, Ontario. And I have been selling real estate for over 13 years in this city. I'm a born and raised Hamiltonian. I use both modern and old school marketing techniques to maximize the exposure of your home, bring as many potential buyers through as possible, show it with passion, and ultimately get them to commit to paying your price or more. If you are serious about selling, then I would highly recommend interviewing me, Justin Little. You'll be glad you did. Now let's jump back into this episode. See, stuff you don't think about, right? Like,
Yeah.
and I know you said something interesting earlier, before this podcast about how people tend to look or consider things in the condition they're in, not sort of the condition that they're going to be when they're older. Can
Correct.
you touch on that a little bit?
Oh, I always talk to my patients about this. Like, and so when I prescribe or make recommendations, I'm not thinking about how they're presenting now. I'm thinking about next 5 years, next 10 years, depending on their diagnosis, right? Because a lot of things can change. Within 5 years, a lot of things can change. So, like, especially as someone who's senior, their condition can take a rapid turn, right? Someone who has dementia can decline within a few years, right? As their brain starts to deteriorate, they start to lose motor functions. They can't walk properly anymore. They don't perceive things the way they normally perceive things. So, like, seeing this table, they might not perceive that as a table anymore, right? So, yeah, so I think about the next 5 years to the next 10 years when I'm prescribing equipment. So, we talked about shower renovations. So, like, if you're thinking about renovating your shower, I find that a lot of people find it just easier to just put in a walk-in shower, but then they forget that when you put one in, you have that little
Little
ledge,
lip, yeah.
the little lip at the bottom. And over time, my patients find it more difficult to step over it. So then they eventually have to get that removed. So a lot of the times what I tell them is just do a roll-in shower and you get like a rubber threshold so that you could wheel right over it, but it keeps the water inside. Um, the other thing you had mentioned earlier was the walk-in tubs. So that's something to think about because it's great at first when you can step over and into the tub. But what if you can't make that step anymore?
Mm.
And the entrance for those tubs are so narrow too, that if someone was to try to help you get into the tub, it's very tricky because you have to, like, kinda the door swings in, and you gotta be careful with what you're holding on to, and then when you take a bath, you have to wait for the water to completely drain before you can open the door,
Mhm.
right? And then the other thing you gotta be careful too is, sometimes, as you start to deteriorate, you start to lose core strength. And sometimes, depending on the diagnosis, people can't hold themselves up. They can't sit upright. So if you've got someone sitting in one of those walk-in tubs and the water's about this high and they can't hold themselves up, they can drown.
Oh, wow. So you didn't even think of that.
Yeah. Yeah. So there's a lot of things to consider. So I usually don't. I usually kind of move away from the walking tubs unless they really want it. And if I know that someone's going to be present with my patient to be there. And if I know that they can step over the ledge.
Mhm. Well, that's good. I was gonna get you to talk back into the microphone, though.
Oh, yeah.
It's okay.
Sorry.
Yeah, it's stuff that people don't think about is that stepping over the lip. You always think you're gonna be able to do it. That drowning scenario, I never even thought of, but if you don't have the core strength and you're older, you're right, you could absolutely fall forward and drown. That's awful to think that could happen, and people might think if you're at that point, then you should be in something that's long-term care, but those are really expensive, right? And a lot of people don't have the money to live in a situation like that, like a long-term care facility, right?
Well, let me tell you, actually, there's quite a few different um environments you can go into. There's assisted living, there's retirement, and there's long-term care, right? So retirement is you're expected to live independently, right? So it's kind of like a condo, but except people are making their meals for you, and the place is supposed to be a little bit more accessible, but you usually have your own kitchenette and your living space and bathroom and bedroom. Um, but retirement homes are the expensive ones. Like you can pay upwards of like 8 grand depending on how many services that you need per month.
Wow.
Because like every service, there's a fee. Um, Laundry, medications, um, and meals. There's an extra cost if you need to get your meals delivered to you because you can't make your way to the dining area, right? Because all meals are served at the dining area. And some of my patients who want to remain in their retirement home might start to lose their mobility. So they can't walk to the dining area. So they have their meals delivered to them. So they have to pay a premium for that.
I guess it all adds up, right? I've only ever been in one retirement home. It was the one on Rymal and Upper Wentworth. I
What
knew
what
where it
type?
was, Wentworth Heights.
Yeah.
I was in that one. That one actually, when I walked in it for the first time, I thought, "Oh, man, this looks like a resort." Like, they have the ceilings all painted, it's huge.
Beautiful.
They have it looks I know they have, like, a little pub in there, and they do, like, a poker night with I don't know, they do all kinds of events and stuff, but it looked like a little walkway, like a little city
Yeah.
when you're walking through it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you're right, like, I know from speaking with that individual that was in there is and her kids, how expensive it is to be living in something like that, right?
Yeah. It can get costly, especially too if you need PSWs as well. Um, you have to pay for the services. And so those are things to think about. I have been there. I've had patients there. Um, when you're looking at a retirement home too, you want to make sure that you also think about the ceiling. People don't think about this, but some retirement homes might have drop downs or drop down ceil no. I think it's yeah, drop down ceilings. And you got to be careful with that because what if you need like a super pole? So to get in and out of your shower, you need it to mount to a ceiling. But if you have drop down ceilings or tiled ceilings, I forget what they're called.
Yeah, no,
You
drop down, yeah.
Yeah, drop down. You can't put a super pole, and a super pole is basically a
A
pole
pole, yeah.
that you can use to hang on to step over and out if you can't put grab bars in. So grab bars sometimes you can't put in, especially if they have a prefabricated walk-in shower. It's one of those plastic molded ones that you just kind of put in as an insert. You can't you could, but like it's not easy to put grab bars into those because if they drill into like the plastic or the acrylics, and sometimes the studs are far away.
Mm,
So then we end up using a super pole. And it has that horizontal bar that can rotate so that you can grab onto. But if you have a drop down ceiling, you can't put that in.
mhm. Yeah, I've seen them, I know what you're talking about. Actually, I did a deal in the St. Elizabeth Village.
Yeah.
I had a client go in there, and they had one in the washroom, and they were saying I remember when we were looking at the unit, like, they were gonna get rid of it, but my patient like, my I say my patient, my client could actually use it, like, benefit from it,
Yeah.
and she was like, "I want that in the house," so we got it included, was a super pole, right? Because it was, like, between the toilet and the shower, and it had that bar that you can use to walk around, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, that's pretty interesting. It's, there's so much to consider when it comes to that kind of stuff,
Yeah.
right? Like, you even said the ceiling height, you wouldn't think of that. But, I mean, that's also where you got a background in construction, right?
Yeah.
So that comes into play.
Yeah. My dad's a general contractor, so I'm very handy when it comes to using a measuring tape and hammer.
I just remembered now. Have it?
I feel naked without.
You whip I can't remember what you pulled it out for. It was hilarious. I think you were you're like, "I always have a measuring tape on me." I'm like, "Really?" And you just pulled it right out of your pocket.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I always have many. Yeah. Because as an OT, you gotta measure everything,
Yeah.
right? Because well, I've gotten to that point where I don't have to measure anymore because I've done so many measurements in the past that, like, I can walk into the bathroom, like, "Okay, that toilet is 15 inches high, that tub is 15 inches, that bed height is 28 inches high." And, like, I already know, but, back in the day, I would, like, just measure everything, and I put in my assessment because, like, when you get equipment, um if the toilet's, like, 15 inches and you get, like, a raised toilet seat that's 5 inches, you have to take into account, like, how tall is this person? And you put a 5-inch raised toilet seat on a 15-inch, and this person's, like, 4 feet high. Like, their feet are gonna be dangling,
Mhm.
right? So that's why it's very important to measure everything. Measure the ceilings, measuring the bed height, and all that stuff. So, yeah, I usually have mine. When I go to work, I have, like, a special little tool belt. Right, and I have my measuring tape. I've got, like, Allen keys in case I have to do a quick adjustment on wheelchairs. Yeah, I
You're
have 'em.
prepared.
Oh, yeah, very much so. Yeah, yep,
That's awesome.
yeah.
So if somebody's not able to leave their house or they're choosing not to leave their house, which can happen too, what are some ways that they can make it accessible?
So it depends on how much money they have. If they're in low income, there's fundings that they can access. So March of Dimes is a popular funding source that they can apply for if they're low income. But there's ways to make the home accessible. So if you live in a two-story home and you have steps to enter the house, you could put a ramp in. Um, or if you have a little bit more money, you could put a porch lift. And I usually recommend a ramp or a porch lift to be installed in the garage because again, it protects you from the weather and it looks more aesthetic appealing and it's easier to remove so you're not damaging the front of the house. And it makes it easier to because then you can pull the car up into the garage. So now you're closer to the car so you don't have to
Mhm.
walk as far.
I have a question actually about that. Do
Yeah.
you need a permit to put those ramps in?
Uh I don't I think there are if I think if you have it at the front of the house and if it extends to a certain amount, but then you could also get like um folding portable ramps that you
Mm,
could just put on the steps. But it depends on how many steps you have. If it's 2 steps, the folding ramps work. But if it's like 3 or 4, it makes it then you need a longer ramp and it's harder to get the folding ramps because they bow in the weight. But that's a good question. I have actually never really asked my patients if they've ever had to get a permit for it. But it doesn't really change the design of the house. It
mhm.
doesn't do anything structurally to it.
Yeah, so probably not then. Yeah.
No, no.
I was just curious about that.
But that's a good
Yeah, I didn't mean
question
to
though.
interrupt you. Yeah.
Yeah, that's okay. That's a good question. Um, and then like I said before, like if you don't have a bathroom on the main floor and you have to situate yourself onto the main floor because you have to get to appointments and whatnot, you could always get a commode. You could use the sink in the kitchen or the laundry. I've had patients install hoses so that they can wash their hair in the sink. Um, you could get a stair lift to go to the second floor, right? Um, Now bathrooms, when it comes to the bathrooms, if they have a tub, again, I don't you could always it depends on what it is that you want. You could get a tub cutout where they cut out the middle of the tub so that you step into it, or you could renovate it so it becomes a walk-in shower. But let's say you can't afford that, and they can be very costly. You could get a tub transfer bench. So it's a bench that sits outside of the tub and inside, you sit down and then you can lift your feet into the tub
Mm,
and you get grab bars. So there's ways to make it cheap
yeah,
and
and make
affordable.
it accessible, right?
Yeah,
Oh, that's awesome.
yeah. Um, and then I've had patients who are wheelchair bound and they can still stay in their home. It just depends. Again, it comes down to how much you can afford because someone who's wheelchair bound can put ceiling lifts in. So they can use a machine that lifts them up from out of the bed and directly into the wheelchair.
Mm.
Yeah.
So that's stuff you want to think about. But I guess it's all your budget too, right? And what you can do and what you can afford. But sometimes spending money on that stuff is cheaper than going into a retirement scenario, right?
For sure. Long-term care is different. It doesn't it's, I believe the amount of it is dependent on your pension too. So there's like so it's roughly around 2,400. But let's say your pension is less than that, then the government it just takes whatever pension you have, and you're not really expected to pay the full 2,400. The government will compensate for that somehow. So long-term care homes are the ones where it's patients or individuals who have severe disabilities and need 24-hour care. That's where they'll go, and that's where there's nurses, there's PSWs, there's OTs and PTs there. Retirement homes, they're not. There's no PSWs there. You have to hire them.
It's interesting stuff.
Yeah.
Well, anybody listening, this is good information for them or their parents, right? If they, especially as how many of us have aging parents now, you got to start thinking about what you're going to do with them. Or some people still have their older grandparents in their 90s. What are they going to do, right? So,
Yep. People have retrofit their houses to design in such a way there's like an in-law suite, either in the basement or on the side. But then, like, you gotta think if you're gonna if you're gonna make an in-law suite in the basement, then you have to think of a way of how to get them out. So then now you have to consider putting a stair lift in to
mhm.
go to the basement. And then also, you're probably gonna have to put a lift in or a porch lift in the garage to get them out of the house too.
Yeah, we're seeing a lot of popularity now with these additional dwelling units in the accessory double dwelling units in the backyard, where people are building separate ones. That's
Yeah.
become really popular. I had Igor on an engineer on a previous episode, and he was talking all about that. And we are seeing that for multi-generational living now, right? Because you could build some really nice ones, real modern, and they're like little condos, but they're all
One
flow
wall.
living. Yeah.
Yeah, that's ideal
Yeah.
if you can afford it.
Yeah, that's the other thing if you could afford it. You know what? Sometimes if you're a kid and you just refinance money out of the house and it costs you whatever, 100 something thousand to build it,
Yep.
it could be cheaper in the long run and then you just pay it off over time, right?
Yep.
Or your parents sell their home and they're able to contribute that
That's
money to build it. So
that's right. Yeah.
lots of options. Yeah.
There is, I've had patients who or sorry, yeah, my patients I've had an elderly lady who lived in a two-story house, but she rented out the basement to students, and it was a symbiotic relationship. It was actually really good. So, she was making some of the money from what the student was paying for rent, but then the student would be available to like, if anything were to happen, she could come up and help.
Mhm.
You know what I mean? If the garbage needed to get taken out or if the laundry needed to get done, then the student can help out with that at a lower rental
That's
fee.
interesting.
Yeah,
Oh, this is an interesting solution for sure.
it is, especially too if like because like a lot of my patients can't go into the basement, so you don't use it. So then might as well rent it out and then at least make some money to help pay for your medical needs, right?
Yeah. So how many years have you been doing this now for?
10 years.
10 years. What would you say is your favorite part of the job?
Uh, I like prescribing the wheelchairs.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Why why is that your favorite part?
I don't know, it's just giving a person ability to be able to get around again. So, like, if someone developed a condition so I know a patient of mine who has MS, and they start to lose their abilities to walk, and then, you know, imagine not being able to get anywhere yourself. So I've prescribed manual wheelchairs or even power wheelchairs, and to see their face light up when they're like, "I can go out on my own," especially someone who can operate a power chair. It gives them their life back,
Mhm.
their purpose, so they can go and do their own thing without needing someone to do it. I had a patient of mine who was stuck in her house for many, many, many years because she couldn't walk. She couldn't leave her apartment. So the only way she would get groceries if someone was willing to buy groceries for her. She couldn't attend appointments because she couldn't get out. Um, so I got her a power chair, and then she was able to go to the grocery store on her own, and she was so happy. It brought her to tears.
Oh, that's amazing. That's
Yeah.
really incredible. That's a good answer. See, it's something I would never think of what a favorite part is, but you're right, you're giving people that mobility and a lot of times even that just mental freedom to be able to go out.
Yeah,
Because when you're trapped in your home, I think a lot of people learned during COVID, it can make you go a little crazy and even sometimes depressed, right? So
for
being
sure.
able to have that mobility is huge.
The isolation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What would you say is the biggest challenge with your job?
Uh, the biggest challenge is how to handle a patient who is in denial about their condition and um, the prognosis. So I've had, and this happens quite a lot, patients who don't believe that they're like, so they'll have a condition, like for example, MS or Parkinson's. It's a degenerative disease where you're expected to deteriorate over time. Like you're not expected to get better. Um, and they don't plan for the future because in their minds they think that they'll improve in their minds. Like I've had patients who have MS and they think that they can walk again, right? It's very difficult trying to maneuver and navigate that situation
Mhm.
without sounding insensitive, without taking away their hope, their motivation. So it's I have to handle that situation very delicately so that they will trust me, but also uh, be motivated to adopt strategies that they can cope with in the future and not just in the present moment.
Yeah. See,
Yeah.
that's something I would never even think of, but you're right. A lot of people, maybe their pride or something, but also not like that's a good way you put it, take away their hope. Because if somebody does have something that is degenerative like that, one of the
Yeah.
biggest things for hopefully getting better is that hope. But if it's an unavoidable disease where you're just gonna get worse, then dealing with that could be pretty
Yeah.
tricky, right?
It is. And the way I deal with it is I have to go by their pace and what they're comfortable with. And unfortunately, I have to take a step back and let them see and feel that struggle. So, for example, I had a patient who continued to struggle with getting in and out of the tub, but I'll get and they would fall trying to get in because they can't lift their feet over. And so people have to carry and lift them into the tub. So I would say, "Hey, how about we try this? Like you don't have to keep it, but let's try a tub transfer bench just to try." You could just try it once with the PSW, and if you don't like it, we could take it away. But that way you don't have to step into the tub. You can sit down and just slide yourself over, and now you're in the tub without having to get up. You don't have to put grab bars in now. And if you need to get rid of it, you just take it out of the tub. No harm done. And so it's just trying to figure out solutions that can be easily removed so that they have options. Then I could say, well, if you really want to try to use your tub, then let's put grab bars in, you know? So I have to work with what they're willing to work with me. And then a lot of the times I have to wait for something to happen for them to really appreciate how badly they've deteriorated. A lot of times it's falls. And sometimes it takes a few falls and a fracture or an injury. So you just have to handle it delicately and just be patient with them.
Your challenges are big challenges then. I feel like this is, a lot of times when I'm talking with people, especially on this podcast, the challenges is something, in their business or certain task or whatever, but yours is really like
Yeah.
the human emotional side. And that's a really tough challenge. That's probably even something yourself that you carry beyond work too, right? That little bit of baggage after work where you're thinking about that person. How do you find that? Do you ever find yourself getting caught up in it, like, somebody's going through a rough time, do you find that difficult to deal with sometimes?
Yeah, it is. I've had patients who have a hard time taking accountability for their actions, have a hard time coping, and they take it out on people. And the way I cope with that myself is I don't take it personally because I know that they're dealing with hardship. And so they're struggling with, life changing news of their diagnosis. So I just don't take it personally and I'm just very patient with them. And sometimes it's just backing up and just saying, "Hey, I hear you," and just repeating back to them what they had expressed, what they were frustrated about. And I feel like when someone is heard, they're more likely to listen. And you build that relationship, you build that trust with them, but it takes time and you have to do it so delicately.
Hmm.
And it's hard because, like, when I worked in the community, patients are very resistant because it's a stranger walking into their home and telling them to change this and this and this. So I don't make all the changes happen all at once. I make suggestions for changes incrementally one at a time. Let's start with the toilet. Oh, that worked well for you? Okay. Let's try the bed rail now. That worked well? Great. Let's try this. Isn't it easier now to get on and off the toilet? They're like, yeah. So once I build that trust, I start to add on more, but I just do it so that they're comfortable. And then slowly they start to trust me and then they don't resist me anymore.
It almost goes back to that habit stacking
Yeah.
concept where you just start with one and then
Yeah.
add more and more.
Yeah.
That's really interesting, and it's definitely you're right. People want to be heard. I know, even with my job, I get people are stressed all the time, depending on their situation. Sometimes it's divorce, sometimes it is somebody's passed away, it's an estate,
Mhm.
sometimes it's financial issues, which I find, and I've had people yell at me on the phone, and then an hour later they're talking like, "I'm sorry," right? But they get worked up about it. And when you're dealing with people's emotions and in their personal life, then definitely sometimes something gets sparked in them, and part of the job is just being that outlet for them,
Yeah.
right? And I guess you're kind of that front-facing outlet, giving people the news that necessarily they might not want to hear or be ready to hear, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting. So, you love what you do?
I do so much. Um, so I work in a hospital setting now. I still do private, and it's different because, like, in the community, I was problem solving, trying to retrofit houses, making recommendations for equipment. But in a hospital setting, it's more rehab focused.
Mm.
In some ways, it's more discharge planning, and that's what's exciting because I have that background where, "Oh, I know what kind of house you live in. These are the equipment you're gonna need. So before you leave this hospital, this is stuff you should probably get."
Yeah.
And it makes it so much more streamlined. And then I can help them prepare, "Okay, so you're gonna need PSW services. Um, you're gonna need this equipment based on what you tell me about what your house looks like. You can try the equipment, because I have a really good relationship with vendors and they're very good. They could bring trial equipment that you can use so that you're not having to buy things. Because, like, especially if you're buying, like, a raised toilet seat or commode for hygienic purposes, you can't return that,
Mhm.
right? But they do have a rental equipment where they sanitize them, so you could try them. And but it depends on the relationship you have with the vendor. So in the hospital setting, it's a whole 'nother ball game of trying to problem solve. And sometimes patients just have a hard time wanting to go home, in their space, or they're afraid to, or sometimes they want to, but they shouldn't.
Mhm.
So trying to navigate that is a different challenge, and I find that fun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's good you find it fun because 'cause I'm sure some people it drives them nuts, right? But,
Yeah.
I that's why you thrive at what you do, right? And obviously you love it, and it's been a good journey for you. If you had to go back to tell Lena something 10 years ago at the start of your journey, if you had to give yourself a piece of advice working in this field, what do you think that would be? What would you say to yourself knowing what you know today getting started in that?
Probably exactly. I did everything perfectly.
I think your husband could vouch for that. Never does anything wrong, right? Perfect.
It's crazy because, like, when I was doing my bachelor's degree, my I initially wanted to be a doctor, and then I realized, like, I think I found more fulfillment in physiotherapy because I worked out, so I really enjoyed that part. But then, so I took a lot of courses in biology, kinesiology, but then I also took a lot of psychology, and I think that's what helps me too, dealing with patients as well, trying to understand them, um, because I understand the psychology part of it. And so I think that's what prepared me for OT.
Mm.
So, to be honest with you, I did everything
The
perfectly.
journey was great.
The journey led me to being an OT.
That's awesome. Well, I'm glad you enjoyed it. I really appreciate you coming on today. This has been so much fun. I feel like we could go for another hour. I'm enjoying it, but we got to wrap it up, right?
Yep.
We can't do it forever.
No.
But thank you so much, Lena. I really appreciate you taking the time to come here today.
Thank you. I had a lot of fun.
That's awesome. And everybody else, thank you so much for tuning in again to this episode. If you haven't already, be sure to click the video over here where you can tune in to the last episode that we did, full of great information there. But thanks again for tuning in, and we will talk to you all again next time.